Hello, and welcome to the official podcast of the Cleveland International Film Festival, CIFF Speaks, sponsored by Wayside Furniture. I'm Dee Perry, and I'm joined by my co-host and producer, Aaron Spears. And Aaron, one of the things I enjoy about watching films for CIFF is that they help me think more deeply, not just about the film's subject, but about life in general.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you, Dee. And as I watched the film we'll be discussing today, I found myself thinking about those turning point moments everyone experiences in life. And if we know what they are when they're actually happening to us in real time.
Well, joining us now is a filmmaker who captured many pivotal moments in the lives of her characters in the film Quickening. We're so pleased to welcome the director and screenwriter of that film, Haya Waseem.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to start off, very basics. You created all of the characters in Quickening as the writer and the director. Could you kind of give us a thumbnail sketch of the family that you've constructed at the center of your narrative here?
Yeah, absolutely. So the family structure is a mother and a father with 3 children, and Sheila is their eldest daughter. She's a college level student, just on that cusp of 19, 20. And then she has 2 younger siblings, a sister who is a teenager and a younger brother who's around 10 years old. So that's the family portrait.
And the family is Pakistani immigrants?
Yeah, so they're Pakistani immigrants. Sheila would have been born in Pakistan and moved with her parents from Pakistan to Canada. They're currently living in Toronto.
And I mention that because there's a dynamic in the film with especially Sheila's mother wanting to have her adhere to more traditional cultural values and Sheila wanting to break away. I wanted to get a sense of what you want the audience to know about how Sheila is approaching life when we first see her in the film.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sheila is definitely a young person who is split between 2 cultures. She has her Pakistani family and her Pakistani values that she's grown up with. And especially, like you said, her mother is really trying to instill and keep those values present in Sheila's life and in all the siblings' lives. But then she's also living in Canada and surrounded by her Canadian peers and going to school and interacting with other people that are her age. So she's definitely someone who is, living between those 2 spaces and trying to navigate her identity between those 2 cultures.
I also got the feeling, and I didn't know if this was intentional or just my own personal look at it, that Sheila seems younger than she actually is in terms of the real life situation early in college. I got the sense that she had reactions more like a younger teenager, like 13 to 15 or something.
Yeah, I mean, I always saw Sheila as really mature in some aspects and really immature in other aspects. And I think that came out of this experience of having a little bit of a split identity. I mean, there's certain freedoms that you're given if you're living in Canadian society in North America. And then there's certain restrictions that come with being from a Pakistani community. And so I think my feeling was that Sheila's character is very childlike in certain aspects where she hasn't gotten the chance to really explore and expand. Yeah. And then she's maybe a little bit overexposed to certain aspects that maybe come from her family or from her culture or from her community that change her personality and her dynamics in different ways. So yeah, I completely agree. She has this very childlike nuances and then these inaccessible parts of her that contain some depth. Yeah.
Well, and speaking to the different parts there, like you're saying, it felt like there were some hidden parts to her as the narrative unfolds. You have these really fantastic lingering shots on her face, kind of deep in thought, reflection, and she mostly doesn't express those thoughts throughout most of the narrative of the film, even though like we can clearly see that they're there because of the way that you're showing us her experience. Why was that your choice for your central character?
I saw her very much as an observational character. Like she's at the center of our film, and we're observing her, and she's our protagonist. But her dynamic in where she exists is more observational. She's looking towards her family, she's looking towards her friends. She's always in this space of trying to identify with one or the other. And I think that's the journey that she's on, is where does she belong and where does she feel like she relates the most. And so our approach in the cinematography and in capturing her was either being very distant and observing her within the environment that she is in,
Mm-hmm.
or being very close to her and trying to get hints through her expression of what she might be feeling. But she's definitely a character who's containing a lot. She's observing and she's internalizing, and and that later like has these physical ramifications. But she's definitely a character that is on the outside, desperate to find a place where she belongs and hasn't quite figured out what that place for her is.
I noticed that too when you mentioned the cinematography, that aside from really keeping it very intimate, with, like I said, with the shots of her face and her contemplation or her reactions sometimes, there's also a really unique way you use the camera to just explore the space that she's in. Was that something you developed as you were writing it, or did that come about once you were working with your cinematographer and you were actually in the locations?
Yeah, I mean, I really like tapping into inspiration for our shot list based on the emotional space of a character. So even though the character isn't expressive in words or in language on screen, that's where I feel like I can be a companion to the character.
Yeah.
Is how can I embody her emotional state, even if there's not words that can be attributed to it? How can we visually communicate or through audio communicate her state of mind?
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of allows me to go into a little bit of an expressive space, a little bit heightened as well. And there's like a hint of, I don't want to call it romance, but there's something very fluid about it that just allows me to express a little bit further than what dialogue might be able to give me. So yeah, my approach to the cinematography and our conversations with the DP were very much about how do we create space, how do we create a visual interpretation and language that is a companion to the character in this film.
It gave me a really solid, like, I felt like emotional connection to her too, because like I feel like everybody's been in spaces similar to that. There's one scene in a car where she's surrounded by her family, like in the car, but like it gives you the sense of like she still feels very alone right there in that moment.
Yeah, the car scenes were fun because you're kind of contained in
Mm-hmm.
one space. You don't really have much access outside, and I also really get nauseous in cars.
Oh,
So they make me, they're this very tricky space for me to be in, because I start to get sick, and if I'm not in a good state of mind. So I
sure.
thought for Sheila that was really, I think that was a really interesting choice to be in that car. But the cinematographer Chris Liu was really great at expanding that space. And I remember when he was doing this panning shot throughout the whole vehicle,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of expands the space of this car that's otherwise quite suffocating. So that was fun. Yeah, that was a good example of how we collaborated in terms of what space are we in and how do we capture it to reveal other aspects of the space that we wouldn't otherwise think of. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually really like those car shots because I was thinking, how big is this vehicle? It's like these panoramic views.
Yeah, we were all squeezed in there.
Wow.
It was not a lot of space.
Nice work. Well, we were talking about things being hidden, emotions being pushed down, and it was apparent in the film that kind of runs in the family. There are scenes where members of Sheila's family are obviously troubled, but they keep saying everything is good, everything is fine. And because I know you wrote that, I was thinking about the challenges you set up for yourself as a screenwriter that you had to illuminate as a director. So talk about how you show that everything is not good, everything is not fine.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of a thing I even experienced personally. Like when there's something that's might be bothering us, or that that within a family it's a little bit difficult to talk about openly. The least that you can do is like, are you okay? Like, are you happy? These basic terms that kind of indicate to the other person that you're hanging on or you're okay. And I always found that and I still see that there's like, there's maybe not that kind of an opportunity to really dive into it on a personal level. So it's just like a temperature check. Like, are you okay? Are you happy?
Yeah.
And so as a screenwriter, how to illuminate that? I mean, that's where the silences came in. That's where the expressions of the characters came in, body language, and then not to discount the edit as well, because in post-production we had all these fluid images that I'm talking about, and just being able to exist with a character who's maybe not able to express themselves fully in that moment, and then giving them space in the edit to kind of exist in that space a little bit longer than maybe they're comfortable, because they do care for each other, but maybe they just don't have the language or the tools at that moment to dive into it together. So it was definitely a challenge. I had to really take off my writer's hat and go into a director's mode when we were going into production. And this being my first feature where I wrote and directed the film, that transition was definitely something that I learned a lot through, because they're very different dynamics.
Right.
Speaking back to this, like kind of that central theme you have of this split for Sheila, she's caught between her parents, mostly within the context of the film, her mother's emphasis on maintaining cultural traditions, but then she's clearly starting to experience some early adulthood, and she has her own idea of being free and having a freer life and what she wants to do that maybe does come into conflict there. There was a line that her mother tells her at one point that says, "Stay within your limits or it will end well, or it won't end well." I think I have that right. Sorry if I'm misquoting your
Mm-hmm.
your screenplay, but is that it as advice? Was that something that you drew on from personal experience, or was that just like great screenwriting where you're like, oh, this is going to set up some good drama, or both?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it was through personal experience. I mean, I remember being in my teens and getting that kind of a warning, like, but I think what I struggled with was, what are those limits?
Sure.
What is the definition of what I'm able to do and what I'm not able to do? And I think Sheila's character is struggling with that as well. I mean, these warnings, so to speak, are so open-ended in many ways too, because they in some ways Sheila has freedom. She's able to spend time with her friends. She's able to pursue the arts, which isn't which would be a limit for certain other families. So I think it was the setup for the film for sure. And it came from personal experience. So it was a bit of both, but I think for Sheila, it was really like, well, what are those limits? And then, maybe consciously or subconsciously getting close to those limits and testing them out.
Sure.
Yeah. I confess I didn't understand the relationship of the title "Quickening" to the film's content until I looked up the word. I wanted to have you talk about what you wanted to express with that word, what you wanted the audience to think about.
Yeah, quickening. When I was writing the film, I didn't have a title, and I really like to have a title to kind of ground me into the writing of the film. And I was thinking about pregnancy, and I was thinking about just that element. And I came across quickening as a stage at which the baby starts to move in your belly. And I just fell in love with that word. It was, quick and quickening. And it reminded me of movement and frenetic energy. For me, that really immediately connected with Sheila's character. and the most intimate detail about her. And it also felt like a great connection to the story because there's movement inside of her that no one else can experience or see, and it's just hers. And so as soon as I kind of came across that word, it just ended up sticking and always brought me back to Sheila's character.
That's, I think, literally the definition of the perfect title. When you have that aha moment and it does everything you want it to do. You're just like, that's it. I wanted to ask you a question about the very start of the film. So it begins with a graphic showing the definition of pseudocyesis. You had me practice that. I think I got that pronunciation right. Could you explain to us like what that is and also why you wanted that information to be right there in front of the audience right from frame one?
Yeah, that was definitely a conversation that was part of our edit. Originally we did not have that written into the script. But pseudocyesis is just the definition for a psychosomatic state that mimics the hormonal changes in the body through pregnancy, but without actual conception. So you're displaying all the signs of pregnancy, but you're not carrying a child. And the reason it was a choice to put it at the beginning of the film was because it's not necessarily the pivotal moment of the film. It's not the reveal of this character isn't actually pregnant. That this was a phantom pregnancy. We wanted to put that right at the beginning of the film because I wanted the audience to think about what could have manifested this condition. What seems to be the crux of the film, what would be, the reveal of this movie, to me meant that we would be watching the film believing that Sheila is pregnant and she's nervous and which is a completely valid experience of watching the film. But what became more interesting for me, especially because, this kind of a story hasn't been explored before, it became an exciting avenue for us to reveal that at the beginning of the film and then create space for what could have brought this about and who are the characters that are in this character's life that could either spark this or later on in the film, what could the interactions and consequences of such a condition reveal? Because that's such a hard limit, like going out when we're talking about limits and what the mother is setting up. If that's a limit of, don't get pregnant, that's set up for so many young women. What happens when you cross that boundary? But then in this case, it becomes this very this tug of war because it hasn't happened, but the character believes that it has. So for me, it created more space for me to investigate what happens in her community, what happens with her friends, what happens with her parents. So that was why we decided to put it at the beginning of the film.
So as you were writing the story originally, was there ever a moment where you kind of wanted to lean into is she really pregnant or is she not, to do that kind of twist reveal? Or did you kind of always have the focus on, no, I want it to be more about, like you said, what's really going on with this character that would get her mentally to that state?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, when I was pitching the film and talking to people about it, the first thing that I would reveal was it's a character who's experiencing a pregnancy delusion. So it was always a part of that was the setup for who this character is. And then it was like, well, what happens after that point? Because I hadn't seen many films growing up where I saw a character who was split between two cultures, where it was, there's the Pakistani community and the Canadian community, and especially of a young woman navigating those spaces. And so I was always considering the film in a way of, this is the character and this is what she's, what state of mind she's in. And when I started to write the script, I took that piece almost as a given element in the film, but that's what was revealing as we shot the film and as we were editing the film, was that piece was so critical to me and obvious to me when I was writing the film that when we were shooting the film and our cinematography's approach, which is very subtle and not necessarily very very expressive, that piece became missing in the edit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the decision came in to put the title card at the beginning, because it mimicked how I was telling the story when I was writing it and when I was developing it. So it was a little bit of a combination of both. When we were writing the film, when I was writing the film, it was leading towards that moment of reveal, but it was more so for the character and for her parents rather than for the audience, which I know it's a little bit of a decision that was made, but that allowed me to explore the themes that I was most interested in, which were, alienation, identity. So that's the approach we ended up taking.
Because also it wouldn't have felt right to have just one of your characters just all of a sudden explain that at some point, like just here's the info, audience, now we're on with the story. Right.
Exactly.
Good point.
Yeah.
Too much exposition.
Yeah.
There are, Haya, some wonderful scenes in the film of dance, the dance company that Sheila is in. And there is, I think, an important statement that the choreographer makes, which is the purpose of dance is to pass a message. That statement made me think about the purpose of a lot of things, but film in this case. The purpose of film for you is what?
Yeah, I mean, that moment with the choreographer, the purpose of dance is to pass the message, was from a thesis film that I had done, where I explored a mime class. And there was something that always stuck with me where they said the purpose isn't to tell a whole story, it's to relate on an emotional level, that you felt something, that the person on screen and the person observing, there was a connection at any moment where their emotional experience was felt. And I really became enamored with that because I think words can sometimes let me down. I speak like 7 different languages. I've been like uprooted from one culture into another. So words, although I really cherish them and they give me an opportunity to express myself, sometimes I find that they're not enough, or I don't know which words to use or what language to even use. And I think that's where film and physical expression or art in any way can kind of go beyond words. So the purpose to pass a message for me was about an emotional experience. That's always been at the core of what I really like to dive into. So when it's said in the film through the professor, and what I hope for Quickening to do is maybe if we don't know the A to Z of the story in a lateral fashion, is there an emotional experience that we can go on and feel, even if that's not a completely conclusive experience, but that there was a message that was passed through an emotional experience is sort of what that means to me.
That came across so perfectly in the film. I wrote down in my notes after the first scene of the choreographer, I was like, this feels like the key to this film. Then I wrote, no, all films. So bravo.
Thank you.
Yeah, the emotional arc definitely comes through, and it's a beautiful film. Really, Haya, thank you for sharing it with us and spending time with us on CIFF Speaks.
Thank you. Thanks, Dee and Aaron. This was great. I really appreciate the time to share a little bit about Quickening, and I hope people get to see it.
Our guest has been Haya Waseem, the screenwriter and director of the film Quickening. That film will be screened Thursday, April 7th at 5:10 p.m. in the Mimi, Ohio Theater at Playhouse Square. It'll also be part of CIFF 46 Streams, which runs online from April 10th through the 17th. Find out more about all that's going on at the film festival by logging on to the website clevelandfilm.org. I'm Dee Perry.
And I'm Aaron Spears.
We thank our sponsor for this podcast, Wayside Furniture, keeping it local since 1937. And thank you for listening to CIFF Speaks.